The anti-Mubarak camp say the government sent in supporters to disrupt what has been until now a peaceful protest. The Interior Ministry denies plainclothes security are involved. Standoffs are being reported in a number of side streets around the main square. Some openly goading the other side, dodging rocks and stones being thrown at them. Makeshift barricades are being used to advance positions. Speaking in London, the UN Secretary-General condemned the violence.
I'm deeply concerned at the continuing violence in Egypt. I once again urge restraint to all the sides. And this is very much unacceptable situation is happening. Any attack against the peaceful demonstrators is unacceptable, and I strongly condemn it.
There are no firm figures for the number of people injured during the fighting. The curfew in Cairo means nothing as thousands remain on the streets and the violence continues. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Let's go back to the live pictures from Tahrir Square there, and we see tensions rising there a bit. People there with injuries, what looks like injuries, bandages on their heads and so on. And the crowd pointing to a man who's being surrounded by a number of people there. It's unclear whether he's a pro or anti-Mubarak supporters, but in the last few minutes we've seen the crowds there hold ID cards, perhaps to show that some of these pro-Mubarak supporters who took to the streets and who clashed with the anti-government demonstrators are in fact police officers who infiltrated the crowds. Again, another man being surrounded here by the people. Let's speak now to Yosan Atanasiapis. He's a photographer who's in Tahrir Square right now as we speak, but he's just returned, I understand, from a makeshift hospital which was set up inside a mosque. Yosan, thank you very much for speaking to us. So what exactly did you see in that hospital? What was happening there?
Well, as dusk came down over Tahrir, there were protesters running everywhere, carrying stones and water, building up supplies for an evening of resistance. Very much a siege mentality here. And having heard that the army is rounding up photographers and confiscating their cameras, having been attacked by a mob myself who nearly took my camera away from me, I tried to get out of the square and stumbled through a corridor into a makeshift mosque, which had been turned into a hospital, and where lining the walls, the sort of narrow corridor and a couple of rooms, a large interior area. There were, I'd say, about 300, 400 injured people, with more spilling out onto the streets, and every few seconds, fresh arrivals covered in blood, holding makeshift bandages over them. Speaking to one doctor there, he said that they dealt with 4 dead people since 11 o'clock this morning, and he said over 1,500 injured with all sorts of different wounds. Very makeshift, certainly no kind of surgery going on there, just enough to throw up the demonstrators and get them out to the new hospital in, again, makeshift ambulances.
Were you able to make out, Yosan, who the injured people were? Were they pro or anti-Mubarak supporters, or was it a mix?
I would say that in the vast majority there would be anti-Mubarak protesters, because if you get wounded on the other side, by definition, you're not in the square, you're going to be taken out. But there were there was at least one quarrel that erupted over a man whose loyalties were suspect. And again, when we came out into the square just a few minutes ago, where we are now, over the loudspeakers, thundering messages calling on people to check the IDs of suspected plainclothes policemen.
That's what we're seeing, in fact, on the live pictures now. People checking the IDs of what they think are police officers. Those are the live pictures there. And some in that crowd being roughed up, by at least one man being roughed up, handled there by the crowds. Tell me more about this makeshift hospital. You say that one doctor there told you that at least 1,500 people had been injured. What type of injuries did you see? How serious were they?
It was really very hard to tell because we were literally stumbling over injured people, but mostly they seem to be wounds inflicted by stones, mostly head wounds, but also a couple of people in a very bad condition, lying on, again, makeshift stretchers, and one of them had a drip connected to him. Again, very, very, very hard to tell. It's really just a confusion of images. Right now, where I'm sitting on a pavement, I've got the surreal image of horses tethered to lampposts underneath tank barrels. And again, right behind me, a suspected, a man fell on his back, being carried by 7 people again to the hospital. So it's, as I said before, it's a siege mentality. It's a siege, a feeling very much of a siege. And the parallels that come to mind are of Tiananmen Square. Really, I can't think of any other time when a major square of a capital was closed off with the expectation of an invasion at any hour.
Who were the people injured? Were they, because we've heard that there were women in the square as well as children. From the injuries you saw, were there any children that had been injured in there? Or women?
I didn't see any children, and I only saw a couple of women who were injured, and their wounds were light. Pretty much when the fighting started, when the rock throwing began, the women were secreted out, and this would have been about 3-4 hours ago before sunset. And at that point, you had organizers running into the square, waving their hands, screaming at people not to run away, to stand their ground, to come back, to man the barricades. That's when they began dragging metal sidings and putting them up on their sides, and then hiding behind them as the rocks rained down.
Thank you very much, Ihsan, for sharing your thoughts there with us and describing to us the experience that you went through today. Thank you very much. Let's now speak to Mr. Mahmoud Zaher. He's a former general in the Egyptian military intelligence. He joins us on the line from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mr. Zaher. What do you make of today's events and the fact that the army just stood there and watched these people clash?
First of all, the incidents that took place today and their timing are very regretful, and the reason for that is the paranoia and schizophrenic Hosni Mubarak. These incidents do not reflect the Egyptian spirit. It reflects the spirit of certain classes within the regime, including businessmen and those opportunists and sycophantic seeking interest. Secondly, as you said, that the army is standing by just watching. The army is not willing to get implicated or get engaged in any kind of violence. And this point will be considered from 1 minute to 48 hours after this action will come.
You say the army is not willing to get involved in any violence. Clearly, they didn't receive any orders to stop these clashes from happening.
Absolutely correct. I did not say to wish. I didn't say that the army is not willing to get engaged or implicated, but we could see that the army is being forced to get engaged in violence, whether by Hosni Mubarak or any other force. Egypt and its army is committed to safeguard the country and its people as well. The Egyptian army
It's committed to safeguard its people, you say, sir, Mr. Zaher, but it's not protecting its people from what we've seen today.
That's true. Today, I see the spirit of the youth And this was at the same time, we are also considering that the other side are also Egyptians, and the Egyptian armed forces are supposed to be protecting both Egyptian sides. Now the army is recalculating its measures and will take the best action for the best interest of the people and the country. We shouldn't fail to remember that the army has issued